Emma was 17 years old when the Great Flood came to Port Haven. The colony sat on the edge of a wide river delta on a planet called Viridian Prime, a world where humans had tried to build a new life among strange lands and stranger weather. Port Haven was not a wealthy place. It was a struggling settlement where people worked hard just to survive another day. Emma lived with her family in a small house made of metal and stone. Her father worked as a surveyor, mapping the dangerous territories beyond the settlement walls. Her mother helped in the colony's medical center. Emma's younger brother, Oliver, spent most of his time playing with other children in the dusty streets. But Emma was different. She preferred to be alone, exploring the canyons and cliffs that surrounded their home. She had learned to track animals, to find water in dry places, and to notice things that others missed. The river had been rising for 3 days. The weather station sent warnings to Chancellor Vance, the man who led the colony. They said a great flood was coming. But Vance did not believe them. He said floods always passed without causing much damage. He told people to stay calm and keep working. Emma's mother was worried. She had seen floods before in pictures and stories from Earth. She knew what water could do to a settlement that was not prepared. When the flood came, it came fast and angry. It did not come slowly like the weather stations had predicted. Instead, it came as a wall of brown water at dawn, carrying trees and boulders and pieces of broken buildings. The water crashed through the settlement walls like they were made of paper. Houses collapsed. People screamed and ran in all directions. The sirens wailed too late to warn anyone. Emma was already awake, standing on the roof of her family's house. She had not been able to sleep all night. Something inside her had told her that danger was coming. When she saw the wall of water approaching, she did not panic. She moved quickly and calmly. She woke her family and helped them climb to higher ground. Then she grabbed a rope and a small bag of medical supplies from her mother's clinic and ran into the chaos to help people who were trapped. For hours, Emma worked in the water and mud, pulling people to safety. She found an old man stuck under a fallen beam and helped him get free. She found 2 children clinging to a piece of wood and guided them to dry land. She was wet and tired and scared, but she did not stop working. Then she heard a sound that made her freeze. It was a cry, high and strange, unlike any sound she had ever heard before. It was not a human sound. It came from beneath the old wooden bridge that crossed the river at the center of town. Emma looked under the bridge and saw something that made her heart jump. A small creature was trapped in the wreckage of wood and metal. Its scales were deep blue and silver, catching what little light came through the water. It had 4 legs with sharp claws, a long tail, and wings folded against its body. The wings were torn and wet. Its eyes were gold and bright and very intelligent. Emma had read every old digital record in the colony's library about the Valerian dragons. Everyone said they were just legends, stories from the past that were not real. But this creature was real. It was drowning. Emma's mind raced with questions and fears. The council would want to capture it. Director Vance would want to study it or destroy it. The soldiers would come with weapons. But Emma did not think about these things for long. She looked into those gold eyes and she made a decision. She dove into the water. The cold shocked her lungs, but she moved forward with purpose. The hatchling thrashed in fear, but Emma spoke to it in a soft, calm voice. She told it that she would not hurt it. She worked carefully to free the dragon from the twisted metal and wood. Her fingers touched the scales and they were warm, not slimy as she had feared. The scales were smooth and beautiful. It took a long time, but Emma finally freed the hatchling. She pulled it toward a rock that was above the waterline. They both collapsed onto the rock, gasping for air. Emma worked to help the dragon breathe, clearing water from its nose and mouth. She stayed with it for an hour until its breathing became steady and strong. When the sun began to set and the flood waters started to recede, Emma made a choice that would change her life forever. She could tell the colony what she had found. She could report the dragon to the council. But she knew what would happen. So instead, she picked up the hatchling, which was lighter than she expected, and carried it to the caves in the cliffs above the settlement. The caves were Emma's favorite place. She had explored them since she was small. She knew the secret passages and the dry chambers. She chose the largest cave and made a bed for the dragon using dry cloth and leaves. She brought water in containers made from clay. She found fresh fish in the river and hunted small animals for food. Emma went to the caves every night for weeks. She snuck food from her family's rations. She brought medicine she made from plants. And she talked to the dragon. She told it stories about the colony, about her dreams, about the weight of loss and survival. She spoke about Earth, the planet where her grandparents had been born. She spoke about the stars and what it might be like to fly. One night, when Emma touched the dragon's scales, she felt something strange. It was like a warmth that had nothing to do with body heat. It was like a connection, delicate and profound, passing between her mind and the dragon's mind. Emma smiled and whispered a name to the creature. Aurelius, she said, which meant golden one in the old human language. Your name is Aurelius. The hatchling's eyes opened, and Emma felt certain that the dragon understood. Days passed and then weeks. Aurelius grew stronger and larger. Its wings began to heal. Soon it could stand and stretch. Emma knew that the time had come for her to do the hardest thing she had ever done. She would have to let Aurelius go. On a clear night when the stars were bright above, Emma led Aurelius deep into the canyons. They walked through stone passages and across wide open spaces. They climbed higher and higher until the colony was just a small light far below. At last they reached a place where the stone opened into a vast cavern. Emma could hear sounds echoing from the depths below, deep and resonant calls that made her chest vibrate. You can't stay here, Emma told the dragon, though her heart was breaking. You belong with your own kind. You'll be great, Aurelius. You'll be magnificent. Aurelius turned and lowered its head. The dragon touched its snout to Emma's forehead, and in that moment, Emma felt the strongest connection of all. It was love. It was goodbye. It was a promise. Then Aurelius spread its wings and flew into the darkness, soaring upward into the mist and shadow of the deep canyons. Emma watched until the dragon disappeared into the night. She stood alone on the cliff edge, tears running down her face, a 17-year-old girl who had saved a dragon. And though she did not know it yet, she had just changed the future of her entire world. 15 years had passed since Emma released Aurelius into the deep canyons. 15 years felt like both a moment and a lifetime. Emma was 32 years old now, and the girl who had waded into a flood seemed like someone from another person's memory. Port Haven had grown in those years. New buildings stood where ruins had been cleared. New people arrived on supply ships from other colonies. The settlement had become more organized, more structured, more official. But it had also become harder in ways that Emma did not fully understand. The old spirit of survival and community had been replaced by business and profit. Emma had become the settlement's chief scout and the unofficial ambassador to the indigenous peoples of Viridian Prime. She was respected by most people and feared by some. The traders knew her name and the routes she had discovered. The indigenous peoples called her the Bridgewalker because she could speak both human and native languages. She had learned to navigate between different worlds and different ways of thinking. But few people knew that Emma still kept a small chamber in the old caves, untouched and empty, where she sometimes sat in silence remembering the touch of dragon scales against her skin. Few people knew that she would sometimes stand on the cliff edge and look toward the deep canyons, wondering if Aurelius still lived, if the dragon remembered her, if their connection had truly been real or just the imagination of a frightened girl. The quiet of those 15 years was interrupted by new people and new problems. Director Vance had died years ago, replaced by a series of colony leaders, each one more focused on profit than on the people who lived in Port Haven. The current leader was Chancellor Reeves. She did not come from Port Haven. She came from the Hegemony Trade Collective, a large corporation that controlled resources and trade across many planets. Chancellor Reeves was tall and sharp. She wore clothes made of expensive materials. She spoke in a voice that was always polite but never warm. She looked at Port Haven not as a home but as a resource to be used. She looked at the people not as individuals but as workers and consumers. At the last council meeting, Reeves had spread a holographic map across the table in front of all the leaders and important people of Port Haven. She pointed to different sections of the map and spoke about expansion plans. Most of the map was green, showing the areas that humans had already settled. But one section was red. That red section was Sector 7. That was the Deep Canyon region. That was where the dragons lived. We want to expand into Sector 7. Reeves had said, moving her finger across the red area. There are rare minerals in those canyons. There is crystal that we can sell to other planets. There is water and metals and resources that the hegemony needs. We can make Port Haven very rich. We can make everyone here very rich. Emma stood up at that meeting. She argued against the expansion plan. She told them that Sector 7 was unstable. She said that the geology was dangerous and that no one fully understood the land in those canyons. She mentioned the need for more thorough surveys and studies before any mining could begin. She spoke about the environment and about respecting the lands that belonged to the indigenous peoples. But Reeves and the other council members smiled politely and dismissed Emma's concerns. They said that the hegemony had experience with mining on difficult worlds. They said that scientists had already done surveys and found no real danger. They said that progress required some risk. They said that Emma was being too cautious, too traditional, too afraid of change. Emma wanted to tell them the truth. She wanted to stand up and shout that there were dragons in those canyons, intelligent beings that deserved protection and respect. But she had no proof. She had spent 15 years telling no one about Aurelius. And who would believe her now? They would think she was crazy. They would remove her from her position. They would proceed with their plans to expand into Sector 7 anyway. So Emma said nothing more. She sat down and felt the weight of her secret pressing down on her like a stone. Emma continued her work as a scout, but now she was increasingly pulled into diplomatic meetings and political discussions. She worked with the indigenous peoples to help them understand the colony's plans. She worked with the colony leaders to help them understand the indigenous people's concerns. It was exhausting work, and it often felt pointless because no one really listened to anyone else. Everyone was too focused on what they wanted. One morning, Emma was in her small office in the settlement's administrative building. It was a simple room with a desk, a chair, and a small window that looked out toward the distant canyons. She was reading reports about mining equipment when her personal communication device suddenly activated. She had not used this device in 15 years. It was old and encrypted, designed to be used only for emergency messages. The sound it made was like nothing else. It was a resonant tone that seemed to vibrate through her entire body. Emma's hands shook as she picked up the device. On the small screen she saw a message. There were no words, just coordinates and a sound. The sound was a dragon's call, high and beautiful and impossible to forget. It was the same call she had heard so many years ago. It was Aurelius. Emma's heart began to beat very fast. She read the coordinates 3 times to make sure she understood them correctly. They pointed to the cliff where she had released Aurelius 15 years ago. She whispered to herself, "Is it really you? Are you coming back?" That night, Emma did not sleep. She lay in bed and stared at the ceiling of her small house. Her mind raced with questions. Was Aurelius still alive? Had the dragon grown large and strong? Did Aurelius remember her? Would the dragon come back to Port Haven? And if it did, what would happen? What would the colony do? What would the hegemony do? Emma got out of bed while it was still dark. She gathered supplies quietly. She packed rope and knives and a small medical kit, even though she was not sure why. She wrote a message to her family saying that she was taking an expedition into the restricted zones and that she would return in a few days. She did not tell them the truth. She did not tell anyone the truth. Before sunrise, Emma climbed the path to the old cliff. She stood in the same place where she had stood 15 years before, at the edge of the stone looking down into the deep canyons. She waited as the sky changed from black to gray to pale blue. She waited as the sun came up over the horizon, painting the canyon walls gold and crimson. And as dawn broke over Viridian Prime, Emma felt something change in the air. A vibration. A pressure. It felt like a voice calling her name across a vast distance. Then the sky began to fill with shadows. The shadows in the sky grew larger and darker with each passing second. Emma stood on the cliff edge, her eyes fixed upward, watching as shapes emerged from the clouds. At first she thought it was a storm. She thought the sky itself was falling. But then she understood. Dragons. Dozens of them. They descended from the clouds like a living tide, massive and powerful and beautiful. Their scales caught the morning light in shades of sapphire, silver, emerald, and gold. Their wings were enormous, stretching wider than any ship Emma had ever seen. Their eyes glowed with intelligence and purpose. They flew in perfect formation, moving together like a single organism, like they were all connected by something deeper than simple communication. The dragon leading the formation was larger than all the others. Its scales were predominantly sapphire and silver, with gold markings along its neck and wings. Emma recognized those markings immediately. She had memorized every detail of Aurelius 15 years ago. She would know this dragon anywhere, even if it had grown 100 times larger. "Aurelius," she whispered, and tears began to run down her face. The dragon circled the cliff once, twice, then landed in a wide meadow below. The ground shook with their weight. Emma could feel the vibration travel up through her legs and into her chest. She stood frozen, unable to move, unable to think clearly. This was impossible. This was real. This was happening. Emma walked down the rocky path toward the meadow. Her legs moved slowly like she was walking through water. Her heart was beating so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. As she reached the flat ground, Aurelius stepped forward. The dragon was so large now that Emma seemed impossibly small beside it. When she stood next to one of Aurelius's front legs, the leg was as thick as a tree trunk. The dragon lowered its massive head toward Emma. She could see the gold eyes looking down at her. She could feel the dragon's breath, warm and gentle, on her face. And then, just as it had done 15 years ago, Aurelius touched its snout to Emma's forehead. The moment they made contact, Emma felt it. A connection, not physical but real, passing through her mind like light through water. It was not words exactly. It was more like emotions and images and feelings. She felt Aurelius's joy at seeing her again. She felt the dragon's memories of the cave where Emma had kept it safe. She felt the connection between them, unbroken across all those years. Then Emma heard a sound that made her pull away from Aurelius. It was the sound of sirens. Many sirens. Coming from Port Haven. The peaceful morning was suddenly filled with noise and panic. Aurelius threw back its head and made a sound that was part roar and part song. The other dragons echoed the sound, and it was so loud that Emma had to cover her ears. The sound rolled across the landscape like thunder. Within minutes, soldiers from Port Haven began to arrive in the meadow. They came in armored vehicles with weapons. They came on foot with guns and devices Emma did not recognize. Chancellor Reeves was with them, her face pale with fear and anger. Behind them came more people, citizens of Port Haven who had come to see what was happening. "Stand back!" Reeves shouted at Emma. "Get away from that creature." Emma did not move. She stood between Aurelius and the soldiers, her arms spread wide. "These dragons mean no harm," Emma said loudly. "They are here to talk. They are here to make peace." "That is a dangerous alien creature," Reeves replied. "We will contain it and study it. Remove the girl from the area immediately." The soldiers began to move forward, raising their weapons. Emma could see their hands shaking. They were frightened. They did not understand what they were looking at. All they saw was danger. Aurelius made a low sound in its throat. The dragon did not move aggressively. It did not attack. Instead, it simply opened its wings wide and stood tall. The other dragons began to gather closer, forming a circle around the soldiers. Then Aurelius created a sound so powerful, so intense, that it rippled through the air itself. It was not a roar. It was something else, something that Emma felt in her bones. The sound hit the soldiers' weapons and the military vehicles. Metal screamed. Weapons fell from hands. The vehicles shut down. No one was killed. No one was even hurt. But the message was clear. The dragons could not be defeated by force. The soldiers stopped advancing. They looked at each other with confusion and fear. Chancellor Reeves's face went from pale to red with anger and frustration. Emma turned to Aurelius and felt the connection again. Images flowed from the dragon's mind into hers. She understood. The dragons had been watching Port Haven for 15 years. They had observed humanity's expansion. They had seen the greed and the destruction. They had also watched Emma, seen her become a leader, seen her try to protect the sacred lands. They had made a decision. Through the connection, Emma heard words in her mind. Not words exactly, but the meaning was clear. The time had come for a new order. Humanity needed a guide, someone who could bridge two worlds. Emma was that person. If she agreed, the dragons would offer protection and partnership. In exchange, humanity would agree to sustainable practices and respect for the sacred territories. Emma closed her eyes and felt the weight of this choice. She had never wanted power. She had never wanted to be anything more than a scout, a girl who helped people survive. But she also knew that without this alliance, the hegemony would continue to expand into Sector 7. More mining would begin. The dragons would be threatened. War would come. She opened her eyes and looked at Aurelius. The dragon lowered its head in what looked like a question. Emma nodded slowly. "I accept," she said aloud so that both the dragons and the humans could hear. "I will help bring peace between our peoples." Chancellor Reeves shouted in protest. She called for the soldiers to arrest Emma. But the people of Port Haven did not move to support her. They had seen Emma stand between the dragons and destruction. They had seen the connection between girl and dragon. They understood that something profound had changed. Aurelius bowed before Emma, acknowledging her choice. And in that moment, the future of two worlds shifted forever. Emma's first year as Empress was harder than anything she had ever experienced. She had thought that being a scout was difficult. She had thought that saving Aurelius as a young girl required courage. But those things were simple compared to the work of building a new world where humans and dragons could live together. The first problem was practical. Port Haven's buildings were designed for humans only. The dragons were too large to fit inside most structures. Emma worked with engineers and builders to create new spaces. They built wide platforms where dragons could rest. They created stone shelters where the dragons could sleep safely. They designed meeting places where humans and dragons could gather together without fear or conflict. The second problem was cultural. Many humans in Port Haven were afraid of the dragons. They had grown up hearing stories that dragons were monsters and killers. Some people refused to leave their homes when dragons were nearby. Some parents kept their children indoors. Emma spent hours talking to frightened people, explaining that the dragons were intelligent beings who wanted peace, not war. At the same time, some of the dragons were skeptical of humans. They had lived in the canyons for thousands of years without human contact. They did not trust that humans could keep their promises. Some dragons suggested that Port Haven should be destroyed, that humans were too dangerous to allow on Viridian Prime. Aurelius stood against these voices. The dragon told the other Valerian that Emma had saved its life when it was helpless. Aurelius believed that humans could change and grow. Emma also had to deal with the Hegemony Trade Collective. Chancellor Reeves did not accept the new order. She sent messages to the central government demanding that Port Haven be brought under military control. She claimed that Emma was a traitor to humanity. She demanded that the dragons be destroyed as an alien threat. But the people of Port Haven voted to reject Reeves's authority. They voted to support Emma and the new alliance. Reeves tried to flee Port Haven, but the dragons blocked her path. She was arrested and held for trial. The evidence was clear. She had been planning to expand into the sacred canyons without proper study or permission. She had dismissed warnings about environmental damage. She had prioritized profit over people and land. In the end, she was sentenced to leave Port Haven and never return. Aurelius flew her to the nearest colony settlement. With the political crisis resolved, Emma began the real work of building a lasting peace. She created new laws that protected both species. She established that the deep canyons would be sacred territory, protected by both humans and dragons. She created trade routes that allowed humans to sell goods to other planets without exploiting the local environment. She established schools where humans and dragons could learn together. Emma spent hours each day learning from Aurelius. The dragon taught her the language of the Valerian people. Not words, but a way of communicating through emotion, image, and intention. Emma learned that the dragons had a complex society with its own government, its own traditions, and its own history that stretched back thousands of years. Aurelius told Emma the story of the Valerian people. They were not originally from Viridian Prime. They came from a distant galaxy that had been dying slowly for millions of years. As their home star grew cold, the Valerian had built great ships and traveled through space. They had discovered many worlds and seeded each one with dragons to preserve their kind in case anything happened to the main population. The dragons on Viridian Prime had been waiting for millions of years for someone to prove worthy of partnership. They had watched humans arrive and begin to build. They had observed humanity's capacity for both creation and destruction. When Emma saved Aurelius as a young girl, it was more than an act of kindness. It was a test. The dragon hatchling had been deliberately placed in the flood by the elder dragons to see if a human would show compassion to an unknown creature. Emma had passed that test. Now she was being tested again, and this time the stakes were much higher. One morning, Aurelius took Emma to a cave deep in the mountains. Inside the cave was a device unlike anything Emma had ever seen. It was made of crystal and metal, and it glowed with soft blue light. Aurelius explained through their mental connection that this was a communication device. It could send messages across the stars to the Valerian Council, a government of different alien species that controlled trade and peace across a large portion of the galaxy. They need to know about you, Aurelius told Emma through the connection. They need to know that humanity is ready to join the greater community of worlds. Emma's hands shook as she touched the device. She was just a girl from a frontier colony. She had never imagined anything beyond Viridian Prime. But now she was being told that her actions had attracted the attention of alien governments that controlled thousands of worlds. Over the following months, Emma worked to strengthen Port Haven and prepare it for contact with the wider galaxy. She trained other humans to become ambassadors and diplomats. She worked with the dragons to establish clear rules for how the two species would interact. She made sure that humans had their own leaders and their own voice, that they were not simply servants of the dragons. Some people opposed Emma's choices. A group of humans believed that she was giving too much power to the dragons. They said that humans should conquer Viridian Prime, not share it. They tried to organize rebellions and protests. But most people supported Emma. They could see that under the new system, Port Haven was becoming safer, richer, and more peaceful than it had ever been. Other people believed that Emma was not giving enough protection to the dragons. They said that humans would eventually betray the alliance. But Emma worked constantly to prove them wrong. She kept every promise she made. She protected the sacred territories from human exploitation. She punished any human who violated the treaty with the dragons. One day Aurelius told Emma that the time had come. The Valerian Council wanted to meet her. They wanted to hear her story and understand what she represented. They were considering allowing humanity to join the greater community of galactic civilization. Emma was terrified and excited at the same time. She had worked so hard to build peace on one world. Now she might have the opportunity to help bring peace to many worlds. She looked at Aurelius and asked, "Will you come with me?" The dragon bowed its head. "Always," Aurelius told her through their connection. "We are bonded. Where you go, I will follow." Emma understood then that her journey was far from over. It was only beginning. The space station orbited a star that Emma did not know the name of. It was massive, larger than Port Haven itself, constructed from materials she could not identify. The station was home to representatives of 12 different alien species. Some looked vaguely human. Others were creatures of tentacles and eyes and forms that Emma's mind struggled to process. Emma stood in her quarters on the station and looked at herself in the mirror. She wore formal clothing that the Valerian had provided, made from fabric that seemed to shift color slightly in the light. She looked older than 32. She looked tired. But she also looked determined. Aurelius appeared in the doorway. The dragon had to lower its head to fit through the entrance. The space station had been modified to accommodate the large creature, but only barely. "Are you ready?" Aurelius asked through their mental connection. Emma took a deep breath and nodded. "No," she said honestly. "But I think I have to be anyway." The great council chamber was a vast circular room with a high ceiling. Representatives sat in tiered seats arranged in a complete circle, so that each species could see all the others. Emma walked into the center of the room with Aurelius beside her. She could feel every eye in the chamber focused on her. Some eyes were kind. Some eyes were cold and suspicious. The leader of the council was a being called Vexthar. It had a body made of crystalline material that sparkled with internal light. Its voice was like music mixed with the sound of wind through canyons. "Welcome, Emma of Port Haven," Vexthar said. "We have brought you here to understand what you represent. The Valerian tell us that you have unified two species and created peace where there was only conflict. They suggest that humanity should be invited to join our community of worlds. But we must understand if this is truly possible." A representative from a reptilian species called out, "Humans are violent. Humans destroy. We have studied your species. You wage wars. You exploit resources. You are not worthy of galactic membership." Another voice from a being made entirely of light disagreed. "But humans also create beauty. They compose music and write stories. They form deep bonds with each other. Perhaps they have potential we do not yet understand." Emma felt the weight of judgment pressing down on her. She stepped forward and began to speak. "I am not here to tell you that humans are perfect," Emma said, her voice steady and clear. "We are not. We make mistakes. We can be greedy and afraid. We can be destructive and selfish. But we are also capable of change. 15 years ago I was just a girl. I did not know how to lead or build empires. I only knew how to show kindness to a creature in need. That single act of kindness created a connection that changed everything. Now humans and dragons live in peace on my world." Emma paused and looked around the chamber. "Strength and weapons do not create lasting peace," she continued. "Fear and force do not make communities strong. What creates real peace is compassion. What builds real strength is the willingness to understand someone different from yourself. When I saved Aurelius, I did not save the dragon because I was powerful. I saved Aurelius because I cared. And that caring became the foundation of everything that followed." The council members were silent for a long moment. Then Vexthar spoke again. "Your words are beautiful, Emma. But words alone do not prove capability. We propose a test. There is a conflict on the world of Carith Prime. Two species that have lived there for thousands of years are now on the brink of war. Resources have become scarce. Both species claim the same territories. Both species are preparing for military conflict. We want you to go to Carith Prime and mediate this dispute. If you can bring peace without using weapons, without using force, then we will consider allowing humanity to join our council." Emma's heart sank. She had no diplomatic experience with alien species. She had no military power to enforce agreements. She only had her words and her experience of building peace on one small world. But she nodded. "I will try," she said. Aurelius and Emma traveled to Carith Prime on a ship provided by the Valerian Council. The journey through space took 3 weeks. Emma spent the entire time studying information about the two species in conflict. She learned their languages. She learned their history and their culture. She learned what resources they were fighting over and why each species believed they deserved those resources. When they arrived on Kareth Prime, Emma met with the leaders of both species. The first species was called the Arenians. They were tall and crystalline, transparent in appearance, with voices that sounded like breaking glass. The second species was called the Methians. They were short and dense, with thick skin that looked like stone, and voices that rumbled like earthquakes. Both species were angry. Both species believed they were right. Both species had weapons ready for war. Emma worked with them for weeks, listening to their concerns, understanding their fears, identifying what they truly needed versus what they thought they needed. The Arenians needed mineral resources to maintain their bodies. The Methians needed the same minerals to build tools and shelter. At first it seemed impossible. There simply were not enough minerals for both species. But Emma understood something that the leaders did not. She had learned it from building peace between humans and dragons. She realized that the two species did not have to compete against each other. They could work together. Emma proposed a system where the Arenians and Methians would jointly control the mining operations. They would share the resources equally. They would trade goods with each other. More importantly, they would learn from each other. The Arenians could teach the Methians their crystal working techniques. The Methians could teach the Arenians their stone building skills. Both species were skeptical at first. But Emma brought them together, not in formal meetings but in informal gatherings. She had them share meals. She had them work together on small projects. She had them realize that they were not so different after all. Both species wanted safety for their families. Both species wanted prosperity. Both species wanted to be respected. Slowly trust began to build. Slowly the weapons were put away. Within 2 months, the Arenians and Methians signed a treaty of cooperation. The agreement became known throughout the galaxy as the Peace of Emma, a landmark moment in galactic history. When Emma returned to the council chamber, Vexthar and all the other representatives stood in respect. It was a gesture of honor that Emma had not expected. "You have proven that humanity is worthy of membership," Vexthar said. "We formally recognize Emma as Empress of Humanity and Empress chosen of the Valerian Dominion. Humanity will have full membership in the galactic community." Emma felt tears run down her face. She had done it. She had brought her entire species into a new era. Through compassion, through understanding, through the willingness to listen and learn, she had changed the fate of billions of people. Aurelius moved beside her and bowed. The dragon's gesture was echoed by representatives of all 12 species. Emma realized in that moment that this was only the beginning. There would be much work ahead.